Japanese is an East Asian language spoken by about 125 million speakers, primarily in Japan, where it is the national language. It is a member of the Japonic language family, whose relation to other language groups, particularly to Korean and the suggested Altaic language family, is debated. Little is known of the language's prehistory, or when it first appeared in Japan. Chinese documents from the 3rd century recorded a few Japanese words, but substantial texts did not appear until the 8th century. During the Heian period, Chinese had considerable influence on the vocabulary and phonology of Old Japanese. Late Middle Japanese saw changes in features that brought it closer to the modern language, as well as the first appearance of European loanwords. The standard dialect moved from the Kansai region to the Edo region in the early modern Japanese period. Following the end in 1853 of Japan's self-imposed isolation, the flow of loanwords from European languages increased significantly. English loanwords in particular have become frequent, and Japanese words from English roots have proliferated. Japanese is an agglutinative, more retimed language with simple phonotactics, a pure vowel system, phonemic vowel and consonant length, and a lexically significant pitch accent. Word order is normally subject-object-verb with particles marking the grammatical function of words, and sentence structure is topic-comment. Sentence final particles are used to add emotional or emphatic impact, or make questions. Nouns have no grammatical number or gender, and there are no articles. Verbs are conjugated, primarily for tense and voice, but not person. Japanese equivalents of adjectives are also conjugated. Japanese has a complex system of honorifics with verb forms and vocabulary to indicate the relative status of the speaker, the listener, and persons mentioned. Japanese has no genetic relationship with Chinese, but it makes extensive use of Chinese characters, or kanji, in its writing system, and a large portion of its vocabulary is borrowed from Chinese. Along with kanji, the Japanese writing system primarily uses two-syllabic scripts, hiragana and katakana. Latin script is used in a limited fashion, such as for imported acronyms, and the numeral system uses mostly Arabic numerals alongside traditional Chinese numerals. History. Prehistory. A common ancestor of Japanese and Ryukyuan languages or dialects is thought to have been brought to Japan by settlers coming from either continental Asia or nearby Pacific islands sometime in the early to mid-2nd century BC, replacing the languages of the original Jomon inhabitants, including the ancestor of the modern Ainu language. Very little is known about the Japanese of this period, because writing had yet to be introduced from China. There is no direct evidence, so anything that can be discerned about this period of Japanese must be based on the reconstructions of Old Japanese. Old Japanese. Old Japanese is the oldest attested stage of the Japanese language. Through the spread of Buddhism, the Chinese writing system was imported to Japan. The earliest texts found in Japan are written in classical Chinese, but they may have been meant to be read as Japanese by the Kanban method. Some of these Chinese texts show the influences of Japanese grammar, such as the word order. In these hybrid texts, Chinese characters are also occasionally used phonetically to represent Japanese particles. The earliest text, the Kojiki, dates to the early 8th century, and was written entirely in Chinese characters. The end of Old Japanese coincides with the end of the Nara period in 794. Old Japanese uses the Manyogana system of writing, which uses kanji for their phonetic as well as semantic values. Based on the Manyogana system, Old Japanese can be reconstructed as having 88 distinct syllables. Texts written with Manyogana use two different kanji for each of the syllables now pronounced ki, hi, me, ke, he, me, ko, so, tu, no, mo, yo and ro. This set of syllables shrank to 67 in early Middle Japanese, though some were added through Chinese influence. Due to these extra syllables, it has been hypothesized that Old Japanese's vowel system was larger than that of modern Japanese. It perhaps contained up to 8 vowels. According to Shinkichi Hashimoto, the extra syllables in Manyogana derive from differences between the vowels of the syllables in question. These differences would indicate that Old Japanese had an 8-vowel system, in contrast to the 5 vowels of later Japanese. The vowel system would have to have shrunk some time between these texts and the invention of the kana in the early 9th century. According to this view, the 8-vowel system of ancient Japanese would resemble that of the Uralic and Altaic language families. However, it is not fully certain that the alternation between syllables necessarily reflects a difference in the vowels rather than the consonants. At the moment, the only undisputed fact is that they are different syllables. Old Japanese does not have h, but rather, which has been reconstructed to an earlier asterisk p. Manyogana also has a symbol for j, which merges with e, before the end of the period. Several fossilizations of Old Japanese grammatical elements remain in the modern language. The genitive particle su is preserved in words such as matshug. Modern miru and kikoaru retain what may have been a mediopassive suffix u greater than kikoaru, and the genitive particle ga remains in intentionally archaic speech. Early Middle Japanese is the Japanese of the Heian period, from 794 to 1185. Early Middle Japanese sees a significant amount of Chinese influence on the language's phonology. Length distinctions become phonemic for both consonants and vowels, and series of both labialized and palatalized consonants are added. Intervocalic merges with by the 11th century. The end of early Middle Japanese sees the beginning of a shift where the attributive form slowly replaces the uninflected form for those verb classes where the two were distinct. Late Middle Japanese covers the years from 1185 to 1600, and is normally divided into 2 sections, roughly equivalent to the Kamakura period and the Muromachi period, respectively. The later forms of Late Middle Japanese are the first to be described by non-native sources, in this case the Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries, and thus there is better documentation of Late Middle Japanese phonology than for previous forms. Among other sound changes, the sequence o merges to, in contrast with op, is reintroduced from Chinese, and we merges with j. Some forms rather more familiar to modern Japanese speakers begin to appear. The continuative ending te begins to reduce onto the verb. The k in the final syllable of adjectives drops out, and sim forms exist where modern Standard Japanese has retained the earlier form. Late Middle Japanese has the first loanwords from European languages. Now common words borrowed into Japanese in this period include pan and tobacco, both from Portuguese. Modern Japanese is considered to begin with the Edo period in 1600. Since Old Japanese, the de facto Standard Japanese had been the Kansai dialect, especially that of Kyoto. However, during the Edo period, Edo developed into the largest city in Japan, and the Edo area dialect became Standard Japanese. Since the end of Japan's self-imposed isolation in 1853, the flow of loanwords from European languages has increased significantly. The period since 1945 has seen a large number of words borrowed from English, especially relating to technology, for example, pasicon, interneto, and camera. Due to the large quantity of English loanwords, modern Japanese has developed a distinction between tci and t and dzi and di, with the latter in each pair only found in loanwords. Geographic distribution. Although Japanese is spoken almost exclusively in Japan, it has been spoken outside. Before and during World War II, through Japanese annexation of Taiwan and Korea, as well as partial occupation of China, the Philippines, and various Pacific islands. Locals in those countries learned Japanese as the language of the empire. As a result, many elderly people in these countries can still speak Japanese. Japanese emigrant communities sometimes employ Japanese as their primary language. Approximately 12% of Hawaii residents speak Japanese, with an estimated 12.6% of the population of Japanese ancestry in 2008. Japanese emigrants can also be found in Peru, Argentina, Australia, Canada, the United States, and the Philippines. Official status: Japanese has no official status, but is the de facto national language. There is a form of the language considered standard, Hyojungo, meaning standard Japanese, or Kyoto Shugo, common language. The meaning of the two terms are almost the same. Hyojungo or Kyoto Shugo is a conception that forms the counterpart of dialect. This normative language was born after the Meiji Restoration from the language spoken in the higher-class areas of Tokyo. Hyojungo is taught in schools and used on television and even in official communications. It is the version of Japanese discussed in this article. Formerly, standard Japanese in writing was different from colloquial language. The two systems have different rules of grammar and some variance in vocabulary. Bungo was the main method of writing Japanese until about 1900. Since then, Kogo gradually extended its influence and the two methods were both used in writing until the 1940s. Bungo still has some relevance for historians, literary scholars, and lawyers. Kogo is the dominant method of both speaking and writing Japanese today. Although Bungo grammar and vocabulary are occasionally used in modern Japanese for effect. Dialects: dozens of dialects are spoken in Japan. The profusion is due to many factors, including the length of time the archipelago has been inhabited, its mountainous island terrain, and Japan's long history of both external and internal isolation. Dialects typically differ in terms of pitch, accent, inflectional morphology, vocabulary, and particle usage. Some even differ in vowel and consonant inventories, although this is uncommon. The main distinction in Japanese accents is between Tokyo type and Kyoto-Osaka type. Within each type are several subdivisions. Kyoto-Osaka type dialects are in the central region, roughly formed by Kansai, Shikoku, and western Hokuriku regions. Dialects from peripheral regions, such as Tohoku or Kagoshima, may be unintelligible to speakers from the other parts of the country. There are some language islands in mountain villages or isolated islands such as Hashijojima Island whose dialect have descended from the eastern dialect of Old Japanese. Dialects of the Kansai region are spoken or known by many Japanese, and Osaka dialect in particular is associated with comedy. Dialects of Tohoku and North Kanto are associated with typical farmers. The Ryukyuan languages, spoken in Okinawa and the Amami Islands, are distinct enough to be considered a separate branch of the Japonic family. Not only is each language unintelligible to Japanese speakers, but most are unintelligible to those who speak other Ryukyuan languages. However, in contrast to linguists, many ordinary Japanese people tend to consider the Ryukyuan languages as dialects of Japanese. This is the result of the official language policy of the Japanese government, which has declared those languages to be dialects and prohibited their use in schools. The imperial court also seems to have spoken an unusual variant of the Japanese of the time. Standard Japanese has become prevalent nationwide due to education, mass media, and an increase of mobility within Japan, as well as economic integration. Classification: Japanese is a member of the Japonic languages family, which also includes the languages spoken throughout the Ryukyu Islands. As these closely related languages are commonly treated as dialects of the same language, Japanese is often called a language isolate. According to Martina Roberts, Japanese has been subject to more attempts to show its relation to other languages than any other language in the world. Since Japanese first gained the consideration of linguists in the late 19th century, attempts have been made to show its genealogical relation to languages or language families such as Ainu, Korean, Chinese, Tibeto-Burman, Ural-Altaic, Altaic, Uralic, Mon Khmer, Malayo-Polynesian and Ryukyuan. At the fringe, some linguists have suggested a link to Indo-European languages, including Greek, and to Lepcha. As it stands, only the link to Ryukyuan has wide support, though linguist Kurakichi Shiratori maintained that Japanese was a language isolate. Korean hypothesis. Similarities between Korean and Japanese were noted by Arari Hakuseki in 1717, and the idea that the two might be related was first proposed in 1781 by Japanese scholar Taken Fuji. The idea received little attention until William George Aston proposed it again in 1879. Japanese scholar Shosaburo Kanezama took it up in 1910, as did Shinpei Ogura in 1934. Shiro Hattori was nearly alone when he criticized these theories in 1959. Samuel Martin furthered the idea in 1966 with his lexical evidence relating Korean to Japanese, as did John Whitman with his dissertation on the subject in 1985. Despite this, definitive proof of the relation has yet to be provided. Historical linguists studying Japanese and Korean tend to accept the genealogical relation, while general linguists and historical linguists in Japan and Korea have remained skeptical. Alexander Vovine suggests that, while typologically modern Korean and Japanese share similarities that sometimes allow word-to-word translations, studies of the pre-modern languages show greater differences. According to Vovine, this suggests linguistic convergence rather than divergence, which he believes is amongst the evidence of the languages not having a genealogical connection. Altaic hypothesis. The proposed Altaic family of languages, which would include languages from Far Eastern Europe to Northeastern Asia, has had its supporters and detractors over its history. Philip Franz von Siebold suggested the connection in 1832, but the inclusion first attracted significant attention in the early 1970s. Roy Andrew Miller published Japanese and the Other Altaic Languages, and dedicated much of his later career to the subject. Sergei Starstein published a 1991 monograph which was another significant stepping stone in Japanese Altaic research. A team of scholars made a database of Altaic etymologies available over the Internet, from which the 3-volume Etymological Dictionary of the Altaic Languages was published in 2003. Scholars such as Yevgeny Polivanov and Yoshizo Itabashi, on the other hand, have proposed a hybrid origin of Japanese, in which Austronesian and Altaic elements became mixed. Skepticism over the Japanese relation to Altaic is widespread amongst both amateurs and professionals, in part because of the large number of unsuccessful attempts to establish genealogical relationships with Japanese and other languages. Opinions are polarized, with many strongly convinced of the Altaic relation, and others strongly convinced of the lack of one. While some sources are undecided, often strong proponents of either view will not even acknowledge the claims of the other side. Phonology. All Japanese vowels are pure, that is, there are no diphthongs, only monophthongs. The only unusual vowel is the high back vowel, listen, which is like U, but compressed instead of rounded. Japanese has 5 vowels, and vowel length is phonemic, with each having both a short and a long version. Elongated vowels are usually denoted with a line over the vowel in Romaji, a repeated vowel character in hiragana, or a tune for succeeding the vowel in katakana. Some Japanese consonants have several allophones, which may give the impression of a larger inventory of sounds. However, some of these allophones have since become phonemic. For example, in the Japanese language up to and including the first half of the 20th century, The phonemic sequence, T, was palatalized and realized phonetically as TCI, approximately chi. Listen, however, now, T, and TCI, are distinct, as evidenced by words like T, a Western-style T, and Chi, TCII, social status. The R of the Japanese language is of particular interest, sounding to most English speakers to be something between an L and a retroflex R, depending on its position in a word. The G is also notable. Unless it starts a sentence, it is pronounced N, like the eng in sing in the Kanto Prestige dialect and in other Eastern dialects. The syllabic structure and the phonotactics are very simple. The only consonant clusters allowed within a syllable consist of one of a subset of the consonants plus J. This type of cluster only occurs in onsets. However, consonant clusters across syllables are allowed as long as the two consonants are a nasal followed by a homorganic consonant. Consonant length is also phonemic. The phonology of Japanese also includes a pitch accent system.